Countries all across the globe are sanctioning Russia. They're doing this because of the Russian conflict in Ukraine, and I think that this is going to have multiple effects. Now, the title of this video is why sanctioning Russians like Roman Abramovich won't accomplish what they think they'll accomplish. This is because sanctions, especially on an entire country or on specific individuals from that country, is only going to cause more division, more desperation. I've talked about that in another video. And I think that that's going to lead to even more conflict, even more negative side effects. Now, let's just take one example of why sanctioning someone like Roman Abramovich is negative to the people that are actually doing the sanctions. So Roman Abramovich, if you don't know who that is, he's a Russian billionaire and he's the owner of Chelsea Football Club. Now, he is a Russian and he has ties to Vladimir Putin, whatever that might mean. But now his football team, the Chelsea Football Club, who is located in London, England, they cannot do many of the basic things that a normal football club would be allowed to do because their owner is sanctioned. So who does this hurt? You'd think, oh, well, this is going to hurt Roman Abramovich because he's making money off of this club. Well, he's not. He's never really made money off of this club. Interesting to think about. He might have made some positives, some negatives. Over time, he's probably made some positives when he took over the club. But in recent years, they haven't made a profit. So he's not pulling any of that money out and putting into other investments. As a matter of fact, he's actually investing more of his own money into the club. So what does that mean? If he invests his own money, he's going to be adding value to the club. He's going to be adding value to the location of the club, meaning London, England. So the country of England is going to benefit from having someone like Abramovich putting money into it, especially if they're not making the money that they normally would if they were like on a net balance or on a positive. So when you sanction him, when you say you can't spend money, when you can't do the normal things that you would do, who does that end up hurting? Now, Abramovich, he's a billionaire. He didn't get to where he is by being stupid, right? He is very, very intelligent. Almost all billionaires, I would say all, are incredibly intelligent. So when he's faced with a situation like this, he's not just going to throw up his arms and give up and be like, oh, this is so terrible, right? He's going to figure a way around it, okay? And with that being said, the club is now the one that's going to suffer. Again, they weren't making any money. It wasn't like it was making him money where he's looking at Chelsea Football Club as a big, huge opportunity. He did it because he loved football. He did it because he wanted that club to rise up, and they did under his time. So those sanctions are going to hurt, not necessarily, they might hurt Abramovich a tiny bit, but again, because he's so smart and because he has so much access to so many different things, especially in Russia, it's not going to stop his quality of life, okay? What it's going to do, though, is think about if you were him. Would you then want to, even though you can't now, but would you want to in the future do business with England, with the UK? If you knew that because of someone that's maybe connected to you, but let's just say those connections are very, very separate, right? He's not funding the military. He's not doing anything that is in direct relationship with Russian government. And who knows, he probably is. But let's just say he's not on a daily basis. That's not what he does. Do you think that he's going to want to take some of his billions and invest that in a country that's doing that to him? Now, there's many other countries that are imposing these sanctions, but where he's doing this business with this football club is in England, so we're using that as an example. I would say no. I would say that's going to make him much more skeptical about doing things outside of Russia in the future. So who does that hurt really? When you have a billionaire who no longer wants to invest in your country, I would think that decreases that benefit from the country itself. Now let's take it to the country's role on the sanctions. So when multiple countries, and let's just use England as the example again, when England sanctions the entire country of Russia, Russia can't do business here. We're freezing all of your assets if you're Russian. And their goal on this, again, is to stop the conflict in Ukraine. So let's think about it for a second. If they want the conflict to stop, their goal or their rationale behind getting these sanctions is we're trying to get this conflict to stop, so we're going to cut off all of these monetary ties to Russia so that they get basically strangled, and it allows them to cut their air supply off if they were getting strangled, their money supply, so they can't do the things that they want, so they can't engage in warfare, so they have to stop the war. That might contribute a little bit to what the end result of this conflict might be. So let's just say they need all these other countries for their help, and now they're cut off from these countries. They can't wage war anymore, so they literally just have to stop the war. I don't believe that that is going to be the case. The reason why I believe that is because they acted out in this way in a moment of desperation. So they're already kind of like, I guess you could say their backs were against the wall. I don't think necessarily that they were. That's just my opinion. I think that there's probably other ways they could have gone about doing what they're doing without resulting to war, but they did. That's what they've done already. We have to accept that fact. So now that they're in this situation, they were doing that out of desperation, whether that was 5% desperation or 95% desperation, there was some desperation involved, or else they wouldn't have done it. They would have figured out another way. But now what are you doing? You're now backing them into a corner even more. And what do people talk about when they try to collect wild animals, or when they are dealing with people? There's people who are desperate. There are people who are acting out. And when they get backed into a corner, there's always a lashing out, okay? An animal will lash out and try at least one or two more times to escape, to fight back, or to do whatever it is when they're backed into a corner. And I believe that that's going to be the end result of these things like sanctions. I think that it's going to back Russia into an even deeper corner than they already feel like they are, or else they wouldn't have done this thing. So now they're going to act out in a desperate, even more desperate way that could be even more damaging, especially to countries in Europe, because they're close by this conflict, and who knows what could end up happening. So I think that sanctioning an individual is not very smart, because those individuals are themselves smart and they can find ways around it. But sanctioning the entire country only makes the government even more desperate. An example would be Iran, right? There have been sanctions on Iran for years and years and years and years. Do you think that this makes Iran more of a global team player when it comes to things like nuclear weapons and military and extremism? I think it does the opposite. When you cut people off, when you say you're not allowed to do this unless if you play by our rules, that makes people more desperate, and it backs them into a corner, and they try to figure out ways of doing it on their own versus trying to play ball. It's like illegal drugs. We have certain drugs in this country that are illegal, and I'm talking about the United States. Certain drugs are illegal. Doesn't mean that people aren't doing those drugs. Doesn't mean that those drugs aren't coming across the border, or they're not being made, or they're not being manufactured inside this own country. So just because something is illegal doesn't stop them from doing what they want to do. I'm not saying that making all drugs, making them legal is a good thing. I don't know, perhaps. It might be good, it might be bad. But when you make it illegal, it doesn't make it disappear. Think about alcohol. There was prohibition. People still made alcohol. People still drank alcohol. People still did the same things that they're doing today. The government just wasn't part of that tax or that regulation that goes along with it. It doesn't make it disappear. But what does happen is it makes things more risky, makes things more, there's a more chance of something negative happening. So when you have a substance that is illegal, the transfer of that substance now gets more risky because there's danger in regard to, hey, you could get caught by the police and you could get arrested for it. But because people know that, they do more desperate things with it to get it, to find it, to grow it, to do whatever. So there's more deaths that get involved with illegal sales of drugs than, let's just use a legal drug like alcohol. Who dies over the selling and buying of alcohol? Does someone try to shoot you for the last bottle of vodka at Costco? Don't think so. But people will shoot you for cocaine, especially if it's in the middle of a shipment and it's massive amounts and they've figured out where it is. So there's this danger that gets involved. When we extrapolate that out to countries now are having to deal with other countries that are maybe on the blacklist, and they're then dealing with the blacklisted people within other countries that are also not playing by the rules. So the criminals, they're going to deal with criminals. We think that, everyone plays by the rules in regard to military equipment. Tell that to Afghanistan and the Taliban. They now have more Black Hawk helicopters than, I think, the United Kingdom. I think that was a recent thing because the United States left a bunch of these helicopters there. Do you think that Afghanistan would be willing to work with Russia in this time of need? Of course they would. So now what are you doing? You're strengthening a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan and Russia instead of them using their funds to do and spread in other ways. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, well, we shouldn't be supporting them anyways. No one should be supporting them because they're doing this terrible thing. But they're, like I said, they're like drug dealers. They're going to figure out a way around it. The billionaires are smart. They're going to figure out a way around it. They're not just going to throw up their hands and go, oh my God, I guess you guys are right. You win. It doesn't work like that. I don't believe it works like that. Now, it might all work exactly the way that they want it to, but I truly don't believe that. And I think that this is going to be a recipe for disaster. And a lot of people thought that this conflict was going to be over and done with really, really quick, like fucking, Hitler taking over Poland, boom, 2 weeks later, they've got control of the country. I don't think that this is going to be a quick thing. I think it's going to get drawn out, and the more it gets drawn out, the more other pieces of the puzzle get tied into it. And like I said, it could be where more other blacklisted, more desperate nations start to come into the fray because Russia gets more desperate and they have to use some of these other means. So I don't think that's a good thing in the long term. I think, again, diplomacy and figuring out what do they want and figuring out a way to make a deal is the best way versus trying to strangle someone because they're going to fight back. And I just don't see that ending up in a good way. So those are my thoughts on the sanctions, whether it comes to Abramovich or Russia. Love to hear your thoughts on the subject because, again, when we share ideas and we get more ideas out there, that is how we start to learn and that's how we can grow. Most people feel like they don't have power in their decisions, but when we don't share and we hold it into ourselves, we have no chance. So I believe that we got to give ourselves a chance, share our ideas. That's why I say start your own YouTube channel. Don't just make comments, comment in video form so that we can have a much more deeper interaction along with these things. But shoot me a comment, let me know what you think, what are your thoughts, and until next time, I'll see you then.